charter rights and freedoms. Some people say these were overridden during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many Canadian judges ruled that this was justified, but was it? The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms doesn't think so, and attorney John Carpay joins us from Calgary. He is the president of the Justice Centre, and he has a new book out called Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians can do about it. The book is available on Amazon. John, welcome. Good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, so before we get to talking about your new book, JCCF is also working on a very interesting court case on the legality of the prorogation of Parliament. Now, I understand the case has been expedited, and many believe the Liberals prorogued simply to have a leadership race. So can you explain how this case will proceed and if there's any chance of winning?
Well, as everybody may recall, on January the 6th, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, prorogued Parliament, which basically is to shut down Parliament, but without an election following it.
Right.
And it was for the benefit of the Liberal Party to have its leadership race. And our argument before the federal court is that this is an abuse of prorogation. Shutting down Parliament should only be done when Parliament has fully finished its business, and it should not be used as a tool for the benefit of one political party. It should be done only in the national interest. And so we secured an initial court ruling to get this expedited, because usually these cases take months, years. And so the court is going to be hearing oral argument on February 13th and 14th, and we could be getting a decision as early as February 17th. And if the court rules in our favor, then Parliament would go right back into where it was, and there could be a non-confidence vote and an immediate election.
Yeah. Now, Parliament, of course, resumes on March 24th. So do you think this court case could actually be decided before then? Hoping.
Yeah,
right?
we could. Well, we're filing our written materials in the first week of February, so is the federal government. And then February 13th and 14th, there's oral argument. So Monday, February 17th, we could have a ruling that sets aside prorogation. And if the ruling is in our favor, then Parliament has to resume immediately the following day or the day thereafter.
Okay, so if you win, that's what happens then?
Yes,
Okay.
Parliament goes right. The court will declare that the prorogation was not legal, and therefore we will behave as though it never existed because it was not valid from the first place, which means that Parliament could go back into session and we could get a non-confidence vote triggering an election.
Yeah, interesting. Now, if you lose, what message does that send to the Canadian public and to politicians?
It's a novel case, so the law in Canada is not clear on what exactly is the Prime Minister's power to shut down Parliament. There's no clear law on it. We have an interesting precedent from the United Kingdom, which is persuasive, but the court need not follow it. In 2019, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament. That was for only 5 weeks, not 11 weeks as in Canada. And the court said that the prorogation was illegal, and Parliament came right back to work the next day. And so we have an interesting precedent that we are putting before the court, and it's going to provide some clarity in Canadian law on this topic.
Oh my gosh, it will be so interesting to see what happens there, John, for sure. Okay, let's get into your book here. So, Corrupted by Fear. What's it about? Who's it for? What do you hope readers are going to take home with this one?
Well, the title of the book comes from many public meetings which the Justice Centre held across Canada in 2022, especially, and a lot of people said, "What's up with these judges? These judges are issuing court rulings saying that the violations of our charter freedoms of association, conscience, religion, travel, bodily autonomy, our rights and freedoms are being violated, and the judges are ruling that these are justified violations." Are the judges getting paid off? Are they getting thick wads of $100 bills? Are they getting a threatening phone call from the Prime Minister or from the World Economic Forum? Why what's up with these judges? And so my answer is no, I don't think judges are getting thick wads of $100 bills, and I don't think they're getting threatening phone calls. But the rulings really are atrocious because you have, I provide examples in the book where judges make assertions in their rulings. They're not supported by evidence that was placed before the court. They're simply repeating what they heard on the 6 o'clock news. And so my thesis is that the judges, as well as politicians and the medical establishment and the government-funded media, they were all corrupted by fear. People got very scared of COVID, and people who are very afraid don't think clearly. They don't debate logically. And so we have this excessive and unwarranted fear of COVID clouds people's thinking, and so people are corrupted by fear.
And your book certainly gives readers a history lesson, doesn't it, John? So we're looking at Nazi Germany having some interesting similarities. It looks like, the media, the church, other political parties, they all bought into that use of fear tactics, is what you're saying. And no one seemed to ask any tough questions. So it seems like the public decided they needed big government to protect them at the expense of individual freedoms?
Yeah, the first quarter of the book looks at how the legal profession in Germany in the 1930s repudiated the rule of law. Lawyers and judges did not come to the defense of the fundamental freedoms of citizens to vote in elections, to speak freely, to think freely, to practice their religion. Everything was put behind this ideology of National Socialism, which was fully embraced by the lawyers and the judges. And Hitler was a masterful user of fear to manipulate people and to acquire power and to maintain power. And the churches ultimately got persecuted by Hitler, but they were preaching this, you always obey every law unquestioningly, unthinkingly, must obey every law, which cover that, and that's not what the Bible teaches. And so the first quarter of the book is about history that has valuable lessons that we can learn from and that we should learn from.
Yeah, and we're seeing this pattern, or we have seen this pattern of judges ruling that yes, citizens' charter rights were in fact violated, but that it was justified. So, can you explain how this is supposed to work?
Well, the government is supposed to present the court with cogent and persuasive evidence to justify demonstrably, as the charter says it, demonstrably justify any health order that violates one or more of these freedoms of religion, conscience, so on and so forth. And but what happened, for example, in the Gateway versus Manitoba case, the judge claims in his ruling, he says, COVID was unprecedented and it was the worst global pandemic in over a century. Both claims are false. COVID was not unprecedented. We had the Spanish flu of 1918 was about 100 times as deadly as COVID. And then we had the Asian flu of 1957, the Hong Kong flu of 1968, both of which were more deadly than COVID. And yet the judge writes these falsehoods into his judgment, and there's no evidence before the court to support it. So this is what we were up against, where judges are ignoring evidence that's before the court and just quoting what they heard on the news and then lowering the bar for government. And so the standard was lowered where the judges ruled, and this happened in multiple rulings. The government doesn't really need to provide cogent evidence to justify demonstrably. They just need to put forward some scientific evidence.
So, why were judges failing to hold governments accountable?
Well, it's frightening, and this is I don't know for sure because I can't get into their heads and their hearts. But my thesis is corrupted by fear. The judges got so scared of COVID because there was the fear mongering on the news, falsely claiming that COVID was far worse than what it really was. The government's data tell us it was like a bad annual flu. That's not my opinion. That's the government's own data. But the media was 24-hour media, like around the clock, every hour, you get these
Mm,
scary photographs
mhm.
of people that are sick and dying. And so I think that the judges got as corrupted by fear as the rest of the Canadian population did.
Yeah. So, what did the statistics actually tell us about how bad COVID actually was in hindsight?
Well, one of the things in one of our court cases, the same one, the Gateway versus Manitoba, our uh, expert evidence debunked the use of PCR testing, which is a polymerase chain, which is based on getting a positive result from COVID by doubling and then doubling again and redoubling a viral remnant. So we exposed how these numbers of COVID cases did not refer to people who are actually sick because the PCR test cannot diagnose COVID. And yet the governments just relied on this PCR testing and came out with these large numbers of COVID cases, which in many cases included people who were not sick. So these are among the things that we exposed in the court rulings. And the judges responded by saying, well, the government's evidence is better, but they would never explain why they thought the government's evidence was better.
Yeah, and of course, like they would always say, trust the science, but it seemed like the science was always changing. So now government agencies have admitted that certain measures that were taken were not, in fact, based on sound science. For example, the social distancing. I think even Fauci came out and said that he didn't know where that came from. It wasn't him that originally said it, but somehow it caught on and became a thing.
Well, and the same with mask wearing. I mean,
Hmm.
if you had asked 100 doctors in 2019, can a cloth mask over your mouth stop the spread of an airborne virus? And close to 100 would have said, like, no, of course not. If you had asked 100 doctors in 2019, can you stop the spread of a virus? Almost all of them would say no. You could slow it down temporarily, maybe, but you can't stop a virus from spreading everywhere. And this was just thrown out the window in 2020 with lockdowns, and not based on scientific breakthroughs, but it was false fear mongering that the medical establishment also bought into.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you mentioned lockdowns there. And I think one of the questions that needed to be asked, I think, was did lockdowns actually save lives? And on the flip side, did our governments ever compile a list of how many Canadians suffered or died as a result of lockdown, isolation, and delayed medical treatment?
Well, this is one of the problems how Canadian judges have lowered the bar for government. One of the things that government should be required to do, and was previously required to do, is if you have a law that violates, say, your freedom of expression, uh, the government has to provide evidence to show that that law is doing more good than harm. And this is part of a test that has been used for decades. And what happened here was the judges said to the government, relieve the government of their responsibility of showing that health orders actually produced more good than harm. So governments didn't even look at the harm of lockdowns, all of the drug overdoses and the suicides and the loneliness, the isolation, the lost income, the unemployment. Like none of those harms were seriously taken into account by governments, and then the courts kind of just gave a stamp of approval, even though the governments had not demonstrated that lockdowns did more good than harm.
Hmm. And getting back to the mask argument, I mean, there is, I guess, argument to say that mask can maybe prevent a little bit of spread. I mean, especially if it's a fresh mask. I mean, they wear them in the hospitals, they wear them during surgery. They must do something, right?
But the surgery masks are not like just a piece of cloth that we put over our face. I would agree with you. If somebody's sneezing, then yeah, a cloth mask is going to, probably keep some particles out. But in terms of preventing COVID, I mean, trying to stop COVID with a cloth mask is like trying to stop mosquitoes by putting up a chain link fence. The mosquitoes are a lot smaller than the individual holes in the chain link fence. And the same way, the COVID particles are so tiny that they're not going to be stopped by a cloth mask.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, your book mentions the trust the science when it comes to the safety and efficacy research done on the vaccines. And a lot of that research was paid for by the vaccine companies themselves. Right, John?
Well, and the scariest thing was that in September of 2021, we had one judge, Michael McGaw in Saskatchewan, who was appointed to the court by Stephen Harper, not by Trudeau. Michael McGaw said that he took judicial notice of the fact that vaccines are safe and effective for adults and children, so that no proof is required before the court, because he just declared that to be a fact, and he ordered a 12-year-old girl to get injected with the mRNA vaccine. Fortunately, the mom won on appeal. But this is really scary to think that a judge who's supposed to be reviewing evidence declares that no evidence is required, that in his court ruling he says it is a fact that vaccines are safe and effective, because he says the Saskatchewan Health Authority and Health Canada said that the vaccines are safe and effective, and that should be good enough. Anybody who questions Health Canada or the Saskatchewan Health Authority is an unreasonable person who need not be listened to. That kind of fanaticism, that's really scary to find that in a court ruling.
John, we are so out of time here because there's just so much to unpack there. But we thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
John Carpay is the author of Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians Can Do About It. It is available on Amazon. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.